Hello, it's the 25th Sunday of the year. This year that comes on September 24th, 2017. So we'll have the three readings for today, a little commentary, and maybe even a little homily today. The theme today is certainly tensions that the sacred authors have, all three: Deutero, Isaiah, Paul, and even Matthew. And so the very first reading is from that famous last chapter of Deutero, Isaiah, chapter 55, that brings that very famous tension in between the immanence and the transcendence of Yahweh. Nobody ever says it better than Deutero, Isaiah. Seek Yahweh, the prophet says, while he may be found. Call him while he is near. Let the scoundrel forsake his way, and the wicked his thoughts. Let him turn to Yahweh for mercy, to our God who is generous and forgiving. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says Yahweh. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are my ways above your ways, and my thoughts above your thoughts. The second reading is that famous section from chapter 1 of Philippians, where Paul's really kind of musing out loud about whether it's better to die or to stay alive at this point of his ministry. He tells the Philippians, "Brothers and sisters, Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me life is Christ and death is gain. If I go on living in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, and I do not know which I shall choose. I am caught between the two. I long to depart this life and be with Christ, for that is far better. Yet that I remain in the flesh is more necessary for your benefit. Only conduct yourselves in a way worthy of the gospel of Christ." The word of the Lord. The gospel in the old days, before 1970, when the new lectionary came in, we used to have every year being read. And my father, who was a strong Union man, was very uptight about hearing this particular section of Matthew 20, the section about the workers in the vineyard at all hours of the day, in the end being paid the same amount of money, no matter how long they worked. My father would often remind us that's why you need a union. If you don't have a union, the owner's going to jerk you around like the owner of this vineyard does. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You too go out into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. He went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, and each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought that they would receive more. But each of them also received the usual wage. On receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I'm not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." The Gospel of the Lord. As I mentioned in that little introduction, obviously today's readings have to deal with tensions of one kind or another. That very first reading from Deutero, Isaiah brings up the basic tension that people experience in faith. That on one level, we experience a God who's extremely close to us as our very breath. On the other level, as Deutero-Isaiah says, at the identical time we experience that closeness of God, we also experience God being far away from us. Far as the heavens are from the earth, Deutero-Isaiah says in Yahweh's words. If we're going to understand Yahweh or understand God, not just in the Hebrew scriptures, but also in the Christian scriptures, we have to deal with that constant tension, that we experience a God day by day who's so intimate with us, so integral to us. It's kind of like that old country western song, I can feel you breathe. Yet on the other hand, we experience a God whose ways are so different we can't understand them. We experience a God who's constantly drawing us beyond anything that we've ever had an experience of here on earth. And if we don't appreciate that, don't understand that, we really don't appreciate God. I often stress, and in my columns here, I stress the difference between Greek thought and Semitic thought. We do not think Semitically. We don't think like the authors of Scripture think. Meaning, when we think about something, what's going on in our mind is different than what goes on in the minds of our biblical authors. When we think Greek. We think like those famous Greek philosophers like Aristotle, Socrates, all these people who basically taught us when we think about something, we analyze that object. We tear it apart somehow or another, piece by piece. And eventually we end up with an either-or ending to it. It's either white or it's black. It's either here or it's there. It has to be one or the other. The people who wrote Scripture thought Semitically. They did not analyze the things they thought of. They synthesized them, like the synthesizer you use in rock bands. They brought things together. Their goal when they thought about something was always to see various aspects of it, different sides of it, even contradictory aspects of it at the same time. So much so that when they finished thinking about something, they came up not with an either-or, they came up with a conclusion, it's both this and that. The both and are always Semitic thinkers. Our sacred authors were kind of like Rev Tevye, the hero of the play Fiddler on the Roof. This famous line that everybody always quotes after seeing the play is, but on the other hand. Rev Tevye would always come up with another hand. Rev Tevye would always come up with another way of looking at something than the people around him had gone through in their life when they thought about a certain object or person. And the authors of Scripture constantly, because they think Semitically, are able to live their lives in a lot more tension than we Greeks. We Greeks, when we read Scripture, we're always looking for the answer. There's one way to describe something, one way to explain something. The Semites would say, oh no, there's lots of ways. So much so that if you really are a person of faith, you're a person who's learned to live with tension, with oppositions, just like Deutero-Isaiah, the immanence of God and the transcendence of God. God's here, and yet God's way out there, someplace far away from us. And we see that even, for instance, in that second reading from Philippians, where Paul's trying to figure out, as I read, is it better for me to die and be with the Lord, or is it better for me to stay here and take care of you in my community? There's no simple answer to that for Paul. It isn't that he suddenly says, oh yeah, I'll look at it from this dimension and I'll forget everything about the other dimension. Paul says no matter how I end, there always will be a tension. There'll always be one way of looking at it and another way of looking at it simultaneously. That's why when we read that gospel, that particular parable is only in Matthew. It only pertains to Jewish Christians, that particular gospel does. It doesn't pertain to any other community, any other gospel community at least. They're all Gentile Christians. Matthew's community is Jewish Christians. And the problem that Jewish Christians have is they followed Yahweh their whole life. They've done everything in the 613 laws of Moses. They've carried all that to the best of their ability. And now, when this gospel is being written, probably, mid-80s or so, there are an awful lot of Gentiles coming into Christianity. I'm sorry, it'd probably be mid-70s, not so much mid-80s for Matthew. But anyway, these Gentiles, who, as I said in my commentary this week, don't know a lox from a bagel. They know very little about Judaism. They are receiving the same amount of rewards in following Jesus of Nazareth that Jewish Christians who have adhered to Judaism their whole lives and the Jewish race for centuries receive the same thing. That's why Jesus brings up this parable of the owner of the vineyard or the owner of the landlord, whatever it is, paying the same amount of money to people no matter how much time they work. In a way, what Jesus is doing as a good Jewish thinker is simply saying, if we go back and look at the generosity of God or the generosity of the landlord, he's not taking anything away from these people. They simply receive what they should have received. But because of his generosity, again looking at it from a Semitic viewpoint, because of his generosity, he's giving more to these Gentile Christians than he gave, in a sense at least, to Jewish Christians. Now, you and I would look at this and say, I don't know if that's fair. Well, how come these Gentile Christians weren't made Jewish? Why didn't Paul and other evangelizers tie them down to following all the 613 laws that they were tied down with beforehand? How come they didn't have to be circumcised? How can they go out right now and eat a BLT, totally against Jewish laws? And Jesus, the risen Jesus, doesn't seem to worry about that at all. I'm afraid if we really are people of faith, we have to get rid of this either-or nonsense where we've given ourselves over to Christianity and theology on that level. And we have to go back to the earliest way of looking at God working in our life on all sorts of levels that are really tension-filled things because there's so many different ways to look at it. I mentioned at the end of the commentary this week, I don't know anybody who doesn't have tensions in their lives. We all do. I think when we read Scripture, though, and understand our original faith, we should have the right tensions, not the false tensions or the wrong ones. And when we read the Scriptures today, especially these three readings, these are three aspects of tension that really are the right ones to have, no matter what other ones we have that sneak in there besides. Thank you.